On July 4th, 1776, a group of delegates gathered in Philadelphia and signed a document that would change the course of history. It was, of course, called the Declaration of Independence, and the 13 American colonies that had spent years under British rule, heavily taxed, politically restricted, and economically limited, when they finally declared themselves free from King George III, it was a resounding statement that we no longer recognize your authority over our lives. It's this moment that America commemorates every year on the 4th of July. And look, I'm no historian, okay? So here's the angle that I want to explore with you today is what does it mean to truly be free? Because political independence is only one kind of freedom. There's another kind, unspoken. It's more personal and far more difficult to attain. And I'm talking about the freedom from what controls you internally, from the need to be approved, from the anxiety of not having enough, from the belief that you have to do everything alone. We all carry these unseen, let's call them dependencies on people, status, comfort, control. And until we examine them and free ourselves from them, they continue to define how we live and how we lead. Now, in our tradition, there's a powerful concept that goes far deeper than external freedom. Imam al-Ghazali, one of the greatest minds in our tradition, has explained that real tawheed, real oneness in Allah, is not just something that you believe. It's a statement of detachment. He said that tawheed is when one sees nothing in existence but Allah, fears no one but Allah, hopes in no one but Allah, and relies on no one but Allah. In other words, you haven't really realized your belief in Allah until you've removed every other thing you secretly rely on. And that's why the Shahada, the foundational statement of faith, begins with a rejection. La, not with an affirmation, but with a conscious breaking of ties to false sources of fear, of hope, of control. And Al-Ghazali says that you can't affirm illallah, except Allah, until you first emptied your heart of all other illusions. So in that sense, the Shahada is the realist declaration of independence from everything the soul was never meant to serve. Now, when we talk about freedom, most people think of it in terms of external barriers, laws, governments, systems, but there's another layer to this. It's the ability to live your life in a way that feels aligned, real, and fully your own. It's the human desire for freedom that is built into each and every one of us. It's the fitrah. It's the drive to live with purpose, to make meaningful choices, and to move through life without being shaped by fear or by pressure. And it's not limited to one culture or one time or one period in history. Wherever people feel confined by power, by poverty, by fear, the longing to break free and live truthfully is always there. Now, this personal freedom takes many forms. It can look like emotional freedom, being able to feel without being overwhelmed. Creative freedom, expressing yourself without any self-censoring. Financial freedom, not having to think twice before buying something or doing something. Time freedom, spending your time the way that you choose. Even spiritual freedom, where your heart is free from all the distractions and idols other than Allah. Now, ironically, the way to this holistic freedom is in the obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the following of his deen, as he says, ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْرِ فَاتَّبِعْهَا وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Allah says, in the translation of the meaning, now we have set you, O Muhammad, O Prophet, والسلام, on the clear way of faith, on the Sharia. So follow it, and do not follow the desires of those who do not know the truth. And this is one of the few ayat in the Quran that actually mention the Sharia, that word, which is this way of living, this way of life that Allah has designed for each and every one of us. And the way that this path was designed is that it helps you to begin to notice what you're allowing to shape you. And it gives you a conscious sense of agency to take that power back. And throughout history, that's what the struggle for freedom has really all been about. It's not about only removing what restricts you, like oppressive systems and ideologies, like materialism and capitalism and racism. It's about reclaiming your ability to move forward for what matters for you. And also, the struggle isn't always external, right? Sometimes it comes from within. It's doubt, it's hesitation, it's shame, it's fear of failure, fear of judgment. These inner voices can stifle a person more than any system, right? And you can have every opportunity in front of you. But if your mindset is still shaped by fear, the whispers of shaitan, the bad company you keep, or your bad influences, you won't move forward. That's why true freedom isn't passive. It requires tremendous effort. It demands that you stay conscious of what you're giving your energy to. and whether it serves your values, your vision, and your growth. Because without that clarity, it's easy to live your whole life reacting, chasing, pleasing, avoiding, but never really choosing to surrender. And when you do make the intention to stop resisting, to truly give up, to wave the white flag, and to surrender to Allah as a Muslim, then and only then will you find true peace and ultimate freedom. It's kind of a paradox, you know? It says that the more you relinquish control to Allah, the more secure you become. The more reliant on Allah you become, the freer you truly are. Because freedom, without the real intention, turns into entitlement or chaos. But freedom rooted in self-awareness, in discipline, in a sense of meaning, and in a connection to our Creator, that is what builds a life that is worth living and brings the ultimate reward in the afterlife. Now, a real declaration of independence doesn't always happen on a battlefield or at a negotiating table. Sometimes it begins in silence, when a person decides to stop living on autopilot. It starts with the realization that life has been shaped by more fear, more expectations, external pressures, than by a conscious sense of your values or a sincere connection to Allah. Spiritual independence begins when the heart no longer assigns power to anything other than Him. When that grip of control that starts to loosen, the chasing for validation or safety or status starts to fade, right? And in its place grows a reliance on the one who is not in need of anything. As Allah reminds us, وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Whoever puts their trust in Allah, then Allah is sufficient for them. But trust doesn't just spontaneously appear, okay? It grows in practice of awareness. And this is where the real inner work begins, right? Noticing what's actually guiding your life, what's going on inside. And in coaching, we call this your internal operating system. It includes all of your beliefs and behaviors that are shaped by your past experiences. Sometimes even protective parts of you that the nafs generates or creates or are formed during very difficult events, which we would call trauma. Like maybe you have an inner critic or an inner child or a version of you that always expects rejection, a version of you that needs control to feel safe, right? These parts often can take the lead and they are silently shaping your decision without your awareness. And the spiritual maturity means then bringing those parts of you into the light, naming them, understanding them with compassion, and then gently choosing the higher path. So independence isn't about severing those connections, killing that part of yourself. It's about breaking the hold that they have on you, these false masters, so that your soul can reconnect with the true source. Because when that redirection happens, when the heart begins to trust deeply and depend solely on Allah, then things start to quiet down, right? There's less chasing, there's less fear, and something begins to open up. Every human being carries these layers, okay? You have your body, you have the heart, you have the nafs, and you have the ruh. All of these are intertwined into one living system. The body experiences the world through its senses. I mean, that's how we experience the world. It's shaped by the experiences that we have, the food that we eat, the movement that we do, and the nafs develops these emotionally wounded parts over time, some protective, some reactive, and they emerge through usually painful experiences or unprocessed moments. Each one of these holds a fragment of emotion or carries a belief. Now, the heart holds all of perception and all of guidance. It's the seat of reflection and spiritual insight. And above that is the ruh, which is placed in you by Allah, which remains untouched and pure. It's connected to the truth, and it remains on that until it is reconnected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Together, all of these aspects and dimensions form you, what we experience as you. They don't always move in harmony though, all right? Because sometimes external forces begin to push, right? Screens, culture, relationships, environment. Sometimes it's actually internal voices begin to echo. Fear of failure, the need to be seen. You have the habit of overthinking. Or sometimes it's whispers from another source. Maybe it's jinn. Maybe it's cultural narratives, unresolved wounds, or even moments of envy or comparison. They sound like urgency. Sometimes they sound logical, but they're silently and insidiously taking the lead. And without this conscious awareness, it's easy to mistake a triggered part of you for the truth of you. So a decision that you make under fear might seem reasonable. It might look reasonable. A habit that's rooted in survival might feel like your personality. That's just the way I am, right? But true progress actually requires clarity. And that clarity begins with this observation, noticing what influences you in your thoughts, understanding where your decisions originate, and differentiating between soul-aligned action, that right action, value-aligned action, and reactions that come from pain. And this is where dhikr, where dua, muraqab, and frankly, coaching can begin to shift things. Because remembrance clears the fog, intention purifies the motive, and sincere asking opens the heart to guidance. And sometimes that guidance shows up in the form of a funny looking guy on the internet with all kinds of weird stuff going on behind it. One last thing that we need to talk about is worship, because it's directly related to freedom. Now, you might think that having to worship something means that you are not free. And many people assume, worship is prayer, fasting, these rituals, right? But worship is really about authority. Whatever holds the power to shape your choices, especially when you're tired, when you're anxious, when you're uncertain. That reveals what the heart is truly beholden to. When you have these emotional wounds that go unprocessed, they don't fade. They take form into these parts of us. And these fearful parts might learn to, for example, avoid risk. A perfectionistic part might chase approval. A protective part could shut down vulnerability to stay safe. These responses, they start off as survival responses, but without conscious reflection, they could evolve into patterns that steer the way that we live. So if fear is always in the room when decisions are being made, it starts to function and appear like a god, an idol, something to be obeyed. If comfort, validation, or control always gets the final say, they begin to take the place of the true guidance, right? And the Quran gives us this exact warning. Have you seen the one who's taken their own desires as their gods? And desires, by the way, just to clarify, are not only about these carnal pleasures. We talk about desires, food, and things like that. No, they can also be reactions, memories, or internal voices that are shaped by pain. And when those parts of you lead, they derail you from your fitrah. They distance you and yourself from the ruh, the part that was of you that was placed inside of you by Allah. Now, in the coaching context, this is where real transformation actually begins, because we really understand who's in charge internally. Are the decisions flowing from your highest values, from your sense of clarity, or is it from a story, that hasn't been healed yet? And I always like to give this example of a bus, okay? Each aspect of you is riding along in this bus, and sometimes the inner child or the inner critic jumps up and grabs the wheel, and sometimes they try to drive the bus, and they might drive it for years on end. But that's not the rightful place, right? They should be in the back of the bus, hanging out with their buddies, right? And you, the highest, wisest, most connected version of you, your soul, should be the one who is driving. And that shift, where divine clarity replaces noise and inner order is restored, it's not a small moment, okay? It often begins when someone recognizes that the story driving them no longer reflects the truth that they now see. It's not about silencing, okay? We're not talking about that. We're talking about realigning everything. And take as an example Malcolm X. He was a revolutionary voice in American civil rights movement. For years, he was a powerful figure within the Nation of Islam, speaking from a place of pain, resistance, and deep loyalty to his community's struggle. But remember, after he performed Hajj, he changed, right? He had an experience that changed his life. He was surrounded by believers of every background and color, and they were bowing side by side in worship. And he saw this unity that transcended races and languages and politics. And so he returned back to his people with a new vision that cost him all of his alliances, all of his friendships, and it redefined his message and what he stood for. And this message, it aligned more deeply with the divine truth that letting the ruh lead is the right way to go, following the path that Allah has laid out for us. And it doesn't have to be soft, right? Sometimes it means like you're standing on truth, even when it costs you your old way of life. So to close this video out, independence isn't just a political concept, okay? It's about the soul's return to its rightful place. And every time you reclaim your decisions from fear, from the nafs, from the noise of the world, and you root it in the reliance on Allah, we're living a deeper kind of freedom. As Rib'i ibn Amr said, when he was standing before the Persian general Rustam, he said that Allah has sent us to deliver whomever he chooses from the worship of men to the worship of Allah, from the narrowness of this world to the vastness of this world and the hereafter. and from the tyranny of man-made systems to the justice of Islam. And this was the explanation that he gave that really summarizes the core message of Islam. And notice, this is not a 2-hour speech, all right? This is a single, concise statement. So if you're ever trying to explain Islam, side note, use this, right? This is our mission statement, because that is what we're trying to do, to liberate ourselves and liberate all of humanity from the shackles of the worship of other than Allah to the freedom and the justice of following Allah's way. Now, if this video stirred something inside you, please take a moment to reflect on it and maybe share what landed most in the comments. And if you're walking this path of spiritually grounded growth, then I invite you to join us in our free Liberated Leaders community. The link is in the description. And of course, subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one, inshallah.